Welcome back to another episode of Burst Mode Games. Don't forget, if you like this content, to please go ahead and subscribe, like, and leave a comment if there's anything interesting that you see, rules violations, or if there's content that you'd like to see in the future. Today we have a awesome 3-army match, 500-point combat patrol each, between the Death Guard, Craftworld Eldar, and the Tyranids. And so if you look at the map that we have set up for this today, in order to make 3 players work, needs to be played a little bit differently. So what we're looking at now is you're looking at a circular battlefield. It's a 36-inch diameter. It's pretty small, but it works well for combat patrol, bound on the inside by those boulders that you see along the perimeter. You'll see a series of objectives. There's 6 objectives around the outside and then a central objective. But first, I'd like to talk a little bit about deployment. So if you look here at deployment, you're going to see that each army is going to have 2 deployment zones. And they're going to be opposite of each other, corresponding with the color of their objective marker. As the armies deploy, they'll place 1 unit in one of their zones, and then they'll place their next unit in their opposite zone. So this will go all the way around until everyone is complete, not going within 9 inches of the center of the battlefield, as signified by that white circle, and not going beyond the boundary as bounded by the boulders around the outside. Right now you should be looking at highlighted objectives. So as you look at these objectives, this is going to lead a little bit into how scoring works for this. And so this gameplay is taken from a forum post by a user on Daka from several years ago, but it's something that my playgroup has used to great success. And how the scoring works is that each army will get 1 victory point at the end of their turn for each enemy objective that they own. And then they'll also get 2 victory points for owning the center objective at the end of the round, and then an additional 3 if they control an objective from each opponent at the end of the turn. And then of course they'll also get a victory point for destroying an enemy unit with a maximum of 1 point per opponent. So if the Death Guard kill a unit of Tyranids and a unit of Craftworld Eldar, they'll get 2 points. If they kill 2 units from the Craftworld Eldar, they'll still only get 1 point for that turn. So that's kind of how that works. It's kind of maximized on that. Okay, so with scoring and deployment complete, let's go ahead and take a look at the armies that we have today. All right, looking at the Death Guard army that we're bringing today. It's the same Death Guard army that we've brought in previous videos. For the headquarters slot and Warlord, they're going to be bringing Typhus, and he's going to be bringing the Miasma of Pestilence, along with Curse of the Leper for his psychic powers in addition to Smite. For the troop slot, they're going to be bringing 5 Plague Marines. And for the elites, they're going to be bringing a squad of 3 Death Shroud Terminators. And then in the heavy support slot, they'll be bringing a Rapier Carrier armed out with a quad heavy bolter. And this is going to be an inexorable plague company, meaning that they'll be able to use a stratagem that'll make an enemy's charge 2 more inches more difficult to make. And so with that, we'll move on into the Craftworld Eldar's army. And the Craftworld Eldar today are bringing, again, a very similar army. They're going to be bringing a custom Craftworld with the traits of Expert Crafters, allowing rerolls to hit and wound, in addition to Superior Shurikens, which is going to allow them 4 additional inches to all their Shuriken weapons in the shooting phase. Their headquarter and warlord is going to be the Spirit Seer, who's going to be bringing Falchu's Wing, allowing him to have a 12-inch movement and fly. The warlord trait, Seer the Shifting Vector, which is going to give him some sweet rerolls. And then he's going to be bringing Protect and Jinx as his psychic ability in addition to the Smite. In the troop slot, they're bringing 10 Eldar Guardian Defenders. And then in the elite slot, they're bringing 5 Wraith Guard with Wraith Cannons. And then in the heavy support slot, they're going to be bringing a Warwalker with 2 Shuriken Cannons, and then a Wraith Lord with a Shuriken Cannon and a Star Cannon and 2 Shuriken Catapults. For the Tyranids today, they're going to be coming as High Feet Leviathan, which is going to allow them a Feel No Pain of 6 as long as they're a Synapse creature or close to a Synapse creature. For the headquarters slots, they are bringing a Hive Tyrant as the Warlord. He's going to be having Adaptive Biology, which is going to minimize wounds by 1 to a minimum of 1 after he's already been wounded. And then he's also going to have the Biomorphic Carapace, which is going to have to make attackers subtract 1 from their wound rolls. And then as far as psychic abilities, he's going to be bringing Catalyst and Psychic Scream in addition to his Smite. And then for weapons, he's bringing Monstrous Bone Swords and then also Monstrous Rending Claws. And then for the second headquarters slot, they're bringing Tyranid Prime, and he's going to be armed with Bone Swords and a Death Spitter. And then for the troop slot, they're bringing 2 squads of Termagants, each with 10, so 20 total Termagants. And then moving into the elite slot, they're finishing out with a squad of 3 Hive Guard with their Impaler cannons that do not require their line of sight to shoot. And so that pretty much sums up our armies. Let's go ahead and move into how they deployed. So after deployment, it should make a little bit more sense how the alternating deployment is kind of working. So as you look, the Death Guard, they are our orange player for this match, and they are currently set up with their Rapier Carrier and their Death Shroud Terminators in the northwest. And then in the southeastern objective, they have Typhus and their Plague Marines. And as you'll notice, they deployed pretty much as close to the center as they could. If you look at the Craftworld Eldar, in the southwest, they have their Wraith Guard, their Spirit Seer, and their Warwalker. And then in the northeast, they have their Wraith Lord and their Guardian Defenders. The Tyranids decided to set up with 1 squad of Termagants to the south, along with their Tyranid Prime on the brown objective. And then up in the north, the Hive Tyrant, the other squad of Termagants, and the Hive Guard. All right, and so with that, the turn order is going to be Death Guard, Craftworld Eldar, and Tyranids. Moving into Death Guard, turn 1. Death Guard turn 1 saw the Death Guard go from 3 command points up to 4. Then going into the movement phase, the Death Shroud Terminators up here in the northwestern objective move south towards the Eldar in the southwest. The Rapier Carrier with the 4 heavy bolters ended up staying where he was. Over here, Typhus moved north towards the Eldar held objective in the northeast. And then the Plague Marines moved south towards the Tyranid held objective in the south. Typhus then casted Miasma of Pestilence on the Death Shroud Terminators successfully, powering through the deny attempt from the Spirit Seer from the Eldar, as well as the deny attempt from the Hive Tyrant up in the north. He then cast Curse of the Leper on the Guardians over here, and that was exceptionally successful due to their toughness being knocked down by 1. So rolled 7 dice, and for every die that exceeded their toughness, which was brought down to 2, inflicted a mortal wound. So ended up killing 4 of the 10 Guardians that were on that objective. So that completes the Psychic phase for the Death Guard, moving into Death Guard shooting. The Death Guard shooting phase for turn 1 started off with the Rapier Carrier firing the heavy bolters and the bolt gun into the Wraith Guard. That combined with the Death Shroud Terminator's pistols, the Plague Spreader gauntlets, ended up killing 1 Wraith Guard and knocking 1 down to 2. Over here we had the Plague Marines fire into a set of Termagants down here on the southern objective, killing 4 of them. And then of course Typhus has no ranged weapon. So that concludes turn 1 shooting phase for the Death Guard, moving into charge and fight phase. In the Death Guard charge phase for turn 1, the Death Shroud Terminators declared a charge against the Warwalker and the Wraith Guard down in the southwest, rolled a 6 and got in contact with both of them. Plague Guard charged into the Termagants in the south, and then Typhus charged into the Guardians up here in the north. So moving into the Death Guard turn 1 fight phase. At the end of Death Guard turn 1, their fight phase was pretty dang successful. So over here, the Death Shroud Terminators ended up killing 3 Wraith Guard, leaving 1 left remaining. Wraith Guard swung back, was able to do 1 wound to one of the Death Shroud. Warwalker was unsuccessful in doing any damage up here. Plague Guard, they ended up schwacking the last 6 Termagants that were still there. And then they piled into, or they consolidated into the Tyranid Prime. And then over here, Typhus ended up killing all of the Guardians. And then piling in, or consolidating, into the Wraith Lord. All right, so as far as scoring goes, the Death Guard are going to score 1 point for killing one of the Tyranid units, another point for killing one of the Eldar units, so that's 2 points. And then they'll end up getting another point for owning a Tyranid objective. So that's 3 points total at the end of this turn for the Death Guard. Moving into Craftworld Eldar, turn 1. Turn 1 for the Eldar started off with them going from 3 command points up to 4. They moved into the movement phase, at which point the Wraith Guard, the Warwalker, both fell back over here, just more to the west, getting out of the way of the Death Shroud Terminators. And then the Spirit Seer moved kind of in between them, trying to stay protected by those 2 bodies. The Wraith Lord used Feigned Retreat, costing 2 CP, allowing him to shoot and charge after falling back, and he fell back towards the center of the battlefield away from Typhus. So that's what brought us to the Psychic phase, at which point the Spirit Seer attempted Smite on the Death Shroud Terminators, Effectively, it went off, but it was then denied by Typhus, who's just under 24 inches away. And so that brings us into the shooting phase for Craftworld Eldar Turn 1. At the conclusion of Craftworld Eldar's shooting, this is kind of what we're looking at. So over here, the Wraith Guard and the Spearseer both shot into the Death Shroud Terminators, not inflicting a single wound. The Wraith Lord, however, was able to kill one and then leave another one with 2 wounds remaining. After shooting with the Wraith Lord, the Eldar spent 1 CP for Fire and Fade to move that Wraith Lord 7 inches and gain control of that Death Guard objective in the southeast. So that concludes the Eldar's turn. They are not going to have any charges or fights, and as far as scoring, they are going to only score a single point for owning 1 objective from the Death Guard. They don't own any Tyranid objectives or the center, and they did not kill any units this turn. So that brings us to Tyranids Turn 1. For the Tyranids Turn 1 command phase, they went from 3 command points to 4 command points. In the movement phase, the Hive Tyrant moves south and then west to close the distance with the Rapier Carrier for the Death Guard, and potentially take that objective from the Death Guard. The Termagants up north ended up swooping around, moving 6 inches, not advancing, to close the distance with the Eldar objective and Typhus over here in the east. And then we moved into the Psychic phase, at which point the Hive Tyrant casted Smite on the Rapier Carrier, but that was denied by Typhus. So then he casted Psychic Scream on the Rapier Carrier, which was successful, and did 3 mortal wounds to that heavy weapons platform. So that takes us into the Tyranids shooting phase. During the Tyranids shooting phase, the Hive Guard and the Termagants each shot what was available to them into Typhus. So the Termagants started off, they had 5 Termagants within line of sight, and they were unsuccessful in getting any wounds on Typhus. The Hive Guard then shot a volley at him, were able to get 3 wounds off, bringing him down to 3, and then used a 2 CP stratagem for single-minded annihilation to shoot again. That brought him down to 1 wound. And so that concludes the shooting phase for the Tyranids, moving into the Tyranids charge and fight phase. Okay, so in the charge phase, Termagants made a charge on Typhus. They were successful with 6 inches. This is prior to pile-in move for the fight phase. And that's going to secure them that Eldar objective if they happen to survive this fight with Typhus. Over here, the Hive Tyrant attempted a charge on the Rapier Carrier, needed a 5. The Death Guard spent a CP to make it 2 inches more difficult for the Tyranids, so he then needed a 7, and then he failed that charge. Did a CP reroll, bringing the Tyranids down to 1 CP remaining, and ended up with another failed charge roll of 3. In that time, or when the declare occurred, the Rapier Carrier also decided to spend a CP for the Death Guard, bringing them down to 1 to fire Overwatch. Was successful in getting 1 shot all the way through for 2 damage on the Hive Tyrant, bringing him down to 10. And so that's the conclusion of the Tyranids charge phase, and we'll move into the fight. We'll finish off the fight over here with Typhus, and then also the fight down here with Tyranid Prime and the Plague Marines. Okay, so the Tyranids fight phase started up here with the Termagants. So the Termagants, they ended up fighting Typhus. Before they did, they utilized the 1 CP stratagem, bringing the Tyranids down to 0, called Caustic Blood, which meant for any time a model dies in that unit, roll a d6, and on a 6, it does a mortal wound to the enemy. So they fought into Typhus. They actually did get 1 wound all the way successfully through, where Typhus ended up rolling a 1 on the save, spent his final CP to make that save. So that was kind of not sure if he should have or not, especially since he ended up dying anyway, but that's what he did. So he swung back, and he was able to knock down 6 Termagants, at which point he did take 2 mortal wounds, which ended up killing him. Over here, we had the Tyranid Prime fight the Plague Marines. Plague Marines fought first. They ended up dealing 3 damage to the Tyranid Prime. Tyranid Prime fought back, and bad luck with the dice, was unable to do any wounds to the Plague Marines. So that brings us to the end of the Tyranids turn. No morale required. Termagants are within 12 inches of the Hive Tyrant. And for scoring purposes, the Tyranids are going to score 2 points, 1 for owning an Eldar objective up here in the northeast, and then an additional 1 for killing Typhus, so killing a unit on their turn. So that brings the final score for round 1 to Death Guard 3, Eldar 1, Tyranids 2. And that brings us to the top of Death Guard, turn 2. Turn 2 for the Death Guard saw them go up to 1 CP, and then as far as movement, the Death Shroud Terminators just secured that Eldar objective and moved closer to that War Walker for preparation for the fight phase. No psychic phase, and that brings us into the Death Guard turn 2 shooting phase. In the Death Guard shooting phase, we started up here with the Rapier Carrier, shot all of the shots into the Termagants over here, really trying to make sure they kill 1 unit per army this turn. Ended up killing all 4 of those remaining Termagants. Moving down south, we then had the Plague Guard, Plague Marines, shoot into the Tyranid Prime. What they did though is they used their final CP to give 3 of their grenades Pistol 6 ability. So that was 18 shots, Strength 4, AP 0, 1 damage, and they ended up chipping off 2 wounds off the Tyranid Prime. Over here, the Death Shroud Terminators, they shot their gauntlets into the Wraithguard and successfully did 1 wound to him. So that completes the shooting phase for the Death Guard, moving into the charge and fight phase. The only action that took place here in the charge phase was the Death Shroud Terminators successfully charging in to the War Walker. Brings us into the fight phase. At the end of the Death Guard fight phase, we had the Death Shroud Terminators killing the War Walker pretty much without issue. A lot of extra wounds to spare. War Walker did not explode. Death Shroud Terminators consolidated into the Spear Seer and Wraithguard while still maintaining control of that Eldar objective there in the southwest. The Plague Marines down here killed the Tyranid Prime after the Tyranid Prime was able to inflict 1 wound on 1 of the Plague Marines. Up here, the Rapier Carrier is still just chilling, doing his thing. And so at the end of the Death Guard's turn for scoring, they are going to score 2 points for killing a unit from each army, and then they are going to score 2 points for owning a objective, or 2 enemy objectives, and they're going to score an additional 3 points because they own an objective from each of their opponents, for a total of 7 points for round 2. And so at the end of their turn 2, their 7 points plus their 3 points brings the Death Guard up to 10 against the Craftworld's 1 and the Tyranids 2. Moving into Craftworld's turn 2. Craftworld turn 2 started with the Craftworld going from 1 CP to 2 CP. Then moving into the movement phase, the Wraith Lord moved from the southeast Death Guard objective down towards the southern Tyranid objective, trying to contest that from the Plague Marines if they have any chance of catching up to the Death Guard's commanding lead. The Spirit Seer remained in place, and then the Wraith Guard fell back towards the northwestern Death Guard objective, close to that Rapier Carrier. Remember, Wraith Guard can still shoot after they fall back. Okay, and then that took us into the Psychic phase, at which point the Spirit Seer successfully casted Smite. Only rolled for 1 mortal wound, however. Did use a command point to reroll the damage, and it rolled up to 3 mortal wounds. So it killed off 1 of the Death Shroud Terminators, and then brought the second one down to 2 wounds. So that concludes all the way through the Psychic phase for the Craftworld Eldar. We'll be moving into Craftworld Eldar turn 2 shooting phase. Craftworld turn 2 shooting. Spirit Seer shot his pistol into the Death Shroud Terminator, no effects. And then the Wraith Guard did end up killing the Rapier Carrier. Ended up doing 5 damage to him, killing it and taking that Death Guard objective in the northwest. The Wraith Lord shot all of his weaponry into the Plague Marines, effectively killing 1 and leaving another one with 1 wound remaining. And so that's going to take us into the charge and fight phase for Craftworld Eldar turn 2. For the Eldar charge phase, the Wraith Lord did successfully get into the Plague Marines, and then the Spirit Seer is still there in combat. And so we'll resolve these now in the turn 2 Eldar fight phase. Okay, at the end of the Craftworld's turn and fight phase, over here the Spirit Seer ended up dying to this Death Shroud Terminator. It was just by 1 wound. The Spirit Seer did use their final CP to try to save that, and still failed. So the Craftworld Eldar are out of CP, and the Spirit Seer died. The Wraith Lord did manage to kill 2 Plague Marines and then not take any wounds in return. And so at the end of the turn for the Craftworld Eldar, they're going to score 2 points. 1 for owning the Death Guard objective up here with the Wraith Guard, and then a second for killing that Rapier Carrier on their turn. That's going to bring the Craftworld Eldar up to 3 points. However, the Death Guard also score a point for having killed another unit, being the Eldar Spirit Seer. So that's going to bring them up to 11. So right now our score is Death Guard 11, Craftworld Eldar 3, and Tyranids 2. And they'll bring us to the top of Tyranids turn 2. Okay, at the end of the Tyranids, all the way through the Psychic phase, this is kind of where we're sitting. So in the command phase, Tyranids went up to 1 command point. Up here, the Hive Guard did move their movement towards this Eldar objective, though they're still too far away to secure it. They're kind of tucked up behind there in that terrain feature. The Hive Tyrant moves close to the Wraith Guard, and then we went into the Psychic phase. The Hive Tyrant was able to, uncontested, there's no other Psychics on the battlefield, cast Smite on the Wraith Guard, kill it, and then use Psychic Scream to actually kill the Death Shroud Terminator. And so there's not going to be any shooting, as the Hive Guard can't shoot into the combat down here due to the kind of the house rules for how we play this. And so that's going to bring us into scoring. And scoring for the Tyranids, they're going to get 1 point for owning 1 enemy objective, and then they're going to get an additional 2 points because they killed 1 unit from each of the opponents, bringing them to 5 points total, 3 points for the turn. And so at the end of Tyranids turn 2 in round 2, we're sitting at Death Guard at 11 points, Craftworld Eldar at 3, and the Tyranids have just gone up to 5. And that starts us at turn 3 for the Death Guard. Okay, so we were able to do the Death Guard's whole turn there. So in the command phase, they went up to 2 CP. In the movement phase, the Plague Marines held tight next to the Wraith Lord. And then in the Psychic phase, obviously nothing. Went into the shooting phase, used 1 CP for the grenade stratagem that turns their grenades into pistol 6. Shot all those into the Wraith Guard, did not successfully cause any wounds, or the Wraith Lord. The Wraith Lord fought and ended up killing 1 of the Plague Marines. And then that last Plague Marine fought back and was able to do 1 wound on the Wraith Lord, bringing him down to 9 wounds. And so, because objective secured, he'll still own that southern objective, and that'll score the Death Guard 1 point at the end of their turn, bringing their total up to 12 to the Craftworld 3 to the Tyranids 5, moving into the top of Craftworld's turn 3. So during the Craftworld's turn, in the command phase, the Craftworld Eldar went up to 1 CP. Movement phase, the Wraith Lord stayed there. It wasn't enough CP for him to fall back and shoot and charge for feigned retreat. That requires 2, so he just hung out. During the fight phase, the Plague Marine swung in, did no damage, and the Wraith Lord finished him off. And so at the end of the Craftworld's turn 3, they're going to score 2 points, 1 for owning the Tyranid objective in the south, and then another for finishing off an enemy unit, bringing their total up to 5. So the Death Guard are now off the table with 12 points. Craftworld Eldar are at 5 points, and then the Tyranids are at 5 points, moving into Tyranids turn 3. For the Tyranids turn 3, the Tyranids went up to 1 CP in the command phase. In the movement phase, the Hive Guard moved over here to secure that Eldar objective. And then the Hive Tyrant just kind of hung out where he was, since he has that Death Guard objective secured, and that's going to score them a lot of points at the end of this turn. Moved into the Psychic phase, at which point the Hive Tyrant was able to bring the Wraith Lord down to 5 wounds between both Smite and Psychic Scream. And then in the shooting phase, the Hive Guard successfully knocked off an additional 3 wounds from the Wraith Lord, bringing him down to 2. And so at the end of the Tyranid turn, they're going to score 5 points. 1 for holding 2 enemy objectives, 2 for holding 2 enemy objectives, and then because they own 1 from each of their enemies, that's going to score them an additional 3 points. So 5 points total, bringing the Tyranid total up to 10. The score at the end of round 3 is Death Guard 12, Craftworld Eldar 5, Tyranids 10, moving into Craftworld Eldar turn 4. Okay, the Craftworlds, they in their command phase went up to 2 CP, at which point they used for Tears of Isha to heal the Wraith Lord up to 5 wounds. The Wraith Lord, seeing that he stands very little chance in this game, so he might as well go out in a blaze of glory, ran all the way up here, shot at the Hive Tyrant, knocking him down to 8 wounds, and then ended up fighting him, bringing him down to 6 wounds. The Hive Tyrant swung back and was able to knock 3 wounds off of the Wraith Lord, bringing him down to 2. And so at the end of the Craftworld Eldar's turn 4, they're still sitting at 5 points, not scoring any additional, moving into Tyranids turn In the Tyranid command phase for turn 4, they went up to 2 CP. Then went into the movement phase, in which no one moved. And then in the psychic phase, the Hive Tyrant was able to just smite down the Wraith Lord, killing him. And so at the end of their turn, they're going to end up scoring 5 points for their objectives, and then an additional point for killing an enemy unit, giving them 6 points and bringing their total score to 16. So at the end of the game, it's Death Guard 12, Craftworld Eldar 5, and Tyranids win it with 16 points in this match at the end of round 4. So at the end of the game, the Tyranids scraped out a victory of 16 over the Death Guard's 12, and the Craftworld Eldar is not so good 5. This was a fun game to watch and comment on. And if you haven't tried 3-player matches like this, I highly suggest it. There's usually that odd person out watching the game, not being able to play. This is a great way to incorporate 3 players, especially on small scale maps. However, it does scale up into 1,000 and 2,000 point games. So go ahead and let me know what you thought about this playstyle, or if you have another 3-player mission set that works well. I'd be very curious to hear that. Other than that, if you like this content, please don't forget to subscribe, like, and leave a comment if you saw any rules violations or if there's anything that you'd like to see in the future.